Regrets? I've no regrets, except that I was born a woman.
She was called the most beautiful creature that ever lived.
Hello?
And she spent the back half of her life taking that beauty apart.
I mean, I just think that, I could have done better. And
She invented an entire look.
somehow.
The black clothes, the corpse pale skin, the funeral organ dread that millions of people still put on every single day. Most of them with no clue whose face they're wearing. And underneath all that ice goddess mystique is a woman who lied about nearly everything.
We never, ever rehearsed either.
Including how her own father died, and who once did something in a hotel restaurant so vicious it forces a real question. Are we even allowed to love any of this?
I just find it very tasteless, really.
If you only have 30 seconds, here's the bottom line of this video. A German model with cheekbones you could set a drink on gets discovered at a Berlin fashion show at 16, drifts through Fellini,
Andiamo a mangiare gli spaghetti,
Coco Chanel, and Andy Warhol's factory, and ends up as the reluctant blonde ornament bolted onto the front of the Velvet Underground.
The police arrived and stopped it because it was disturbing 20 blocks around.
Then she does the most punk thing anyone in that entire scene ever pulled off. She throws the ornament away. She dyes the famous hair dark, wraps herself head to toe in black, swaps 3-minute pop for a droning Indian pump organ, and more or less invents goth a full decade before it became a thing. Her secret was never the face. Her secret was refusing to be defined by it, and willing to look like the abyss to prove the point. But if you want the real material, the movie star baby nobody would claim, the song Dylan wrote and gave away, the blood ritual in the desert, Come With Me. Welcome. I'm Kira, and this is your beauty blueprint. I've spent the last week buried in all things Nico, the biographies, the interviews, the films almost nobody finishes, the recordings people describe less as albums and more as holes you fall into. I pulled the best of it out for you, and I separated the verified from the invented.
Marilyn Monroe was in my class.
Which, with this particular woman, is close to a full-time job.
I had been making movies.
Stick around to the end, because I'm going to break down exactly what we can lift from Nico's style universe, practically, in your own mirror tomorrow morning. Not so you can become her, so you can find your own version of what she was doing. And because I could not resist, I designed a Nico-inspired t-shirt just for this video's launch, and the link is waiting for you down in the description. So settle in and pour yourself something dark and red. A heavy red wine will do beautifully, but if you want to be truly Nico about it, make it sangria, because at Warhol's table she used to fish the wine-soaked fruit out of the pitcher and leave the rest purring. I only like the food that floats in the wine. That one sentence tells you more about her than most biographies manage in 300 pages. Here's a tiny backstory. She was born Christa Päffgen on the 16th of October 1938 in Cologne, Germany. That makes her a Libra sun, which I'll come back to, because it is almost too perfect. The sign of beauty, balance, and the aesthetic ideal, stamped onto a woman who made aesthetics into a kind of weapon. Her Venus sits at an exact trine to Pluto. 0 degrees, no wiggle room, beauty soldered straight to death and ruin. Her rising sign is Aries, which hands the whole chart over to Mars, and her Mars is fused with Neptune. The warrior's will curdling into dissolution, discipline dissolving in the fog. Underneath all of it runs a Cancer moon in its own sign, deep and tidal and heavy, the melancholy that so obviously soaks every note of the marble index. Every thread in this chart loops back to that moon. She was, quite literally, ruled by feeling and by the urge to erase herself. Her biographer Richard Witts subtitled his book The Life and Lies of an Icon, and he was not being cute. She lied about her age. She sometimes claimed she'd been born in Budapest. She hinted at Spanish, Turkish, part Arab blood, anything to sound like something other than what she was, which was a girl from a prosperous Cologne brewing family. Her father, Wilhelm Päffgen, came from the wealthy Päffgen-Kelch dynasty, Catholic, comfortable, thoroughly German. Her mother, Grete, was Protestant and poor. When Christa was 2, the bombs started falling on Cologne, and her mother carried her out to the Spreewald forest near Berlin, to her grandfather's house. So she grew up inside the war, Berlin in flames, the fall of the city, the hunger and the rubble that came after. One writer described a sea of darkness around her. Born under the Nazis, raised in the ashes, marked for life by that very specific modern guilt of being German. And her father? This is where you have to hold several stories at once, because not one of them is nailed down. The best documented version, from Richard Witts, is brutal. Wilhelm was drafted into the Wehrmacht, took a French sniper's bullet to the head in 1942, and because the wound was grave and the brain damage likely permanent, his own commanding officer followed standing orders and finished him off. A battlefield mercy killing. What's his grim little summary of it? A Nazi, killed by the Nazis. Other versions have him locked in an asylum, or dead in a concentration camp, or simply dissolving from shell shock. The camp story traces straight back to Nico's own mouth, so treat it accordingly. And that dramatic line you'll see repeated everywhere, that the Nazis euthanized her disabled father. It's a powerful reading, thematic worse. Now, the name? She did not choose Nico. At 16, at a fashion show inside the Kadeaway department store in Berlin, a photographer named Herbert Tobias looked at her and renamed her after a Greek filmmaker, Nikos Papatakis. A man Herbert Tobias happened to be in love with at the time, so the single word the entire world knows her by started life as some photographer's crush. And here is the part that sounds invented, but actually isn't. A few years later, adrift in New York, she actually met the real Nikos Papatakis, moved in with him, and after he heard her humming around the apartment, he was the one who told her to try singing and arranged her first lessons. The name found her before the voice did. She dyed her brown hair blonde, later crediting Hemingway of all people for the idea, and became a serious European fashion model. Vogue, Elle, Tempo, the whole glossy circuit. Nearly 5'10", sculpted porcelain fluent in 4 or 5 languages, gliding through Berlin and Paris and Rome as though she'd been engineered for it. At 17, she was briefly signed to Coco Chanel herself, and then she did the thing that becomes a lifelong theme. She walked out on the sure thing and bolted to New York. She turned up in Fellini's La Dolce Vita in 1960, essentially playing a version of herself, a model named Nico who whisks the hero off to a crumbling aristocrat's party. There were smaller film roles too, and a 1963 lead in a picture called Striptease, for which she recorded a title song written by Serge Gainsbourg that got shelved at the time. She studied at Lee Strasberg's Actors Studio in New York. You'll read that Marilyn Monroe was in her class, and maybe she was, but that detail has the fingerprints of a good anecdote all over it, so I wouldn't bet my rent on it. And in 1965, she cut a debut single, I'm Not Sayin', a Gordon Lightfoot song produced by Andrew Loog Oldham with a teenage Jimmy Page playing 12-string guitar behind her. File that one away for the next time someone tells you their resume is eclectic. Here's the question that should be itching at you by now. How does a woman this beautiful, this in demand, this obviously built to win the game, how does she decide to burn the whole thing down and spend the next 20 years making herself look like death behind a pump organ? Hold that thought. We're getting there. First, the men, because with Nico the romances and the career are the same story told twice. She had a son. In 1962, she gave birth to a boy, Christian Aaron, whom everyone called Ari, and she named the French movie star Alain Delon as the father. Delon denied it to the day he died. His words to the child were as cold as anything in this whole account. You're not my son. You'll never be my son. So Ari was raised instead by Delon's own mother, Edith, who took one look at a newspaper photo of the little boy, recognized her son's face in it, and quietly claimed her grandson. And Nico as a mother. Edith's version is rather devastating. The toddler ate almost nothing but French fries. In train stations and airports. Nico visited him, Edith said, roughly once in 3 years, and once she brought him a present all the way from America. Guess what it was? An orange? Ari's life would eventually be swallowed by heroin, an addiction he said his own mother handed him, and he was tragically found dead in a Paris apartment in 2023 at 60. The rest of the men move fast. Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones pulled her into London. Bob Dylan met her in Paris and handed her a song, I'll Keep It With Mine, like a party favor. The teenage Jackson Browne became her boyfriend and gave her These Days, a song you absolutely know even if you're certain you don't, later stitched into the Royal Tenenbaums over Gwyneth Paltrow stepping off a bus in slow motion. Beautiful men kept writing beautiful things for her, but none of it was quite hers yet. Then came Andy Warhol. In 1966, Warhol and his lieutenant Paul Morrissey took this luminous blonde and screwed her onto the front of a scuzzy, leather-clad New York band called the Velvet Underground. And the band, to put it gently, was not delighted. Lou Reed in particular resented having her handed to him, but Warhol adored the picture of it. A towering Germanic goddess out front, 4 sneering art punks behind her. On the 1967 debut, the record with the peeling banana on the cover, she sang lead on 3 songs Reed wrote, Femme Fatale, All Tomorrow's Parties, and I'll Be Your Mirror. And the little ampersand in the Velvet Underground and Nico tells you everything about how separate they kept her. All Tomorrow's Parties, for the record, was Warhol's favorite. Nobody could quite describe her voice, so they reached for images instead. One critic called her half goddess and half icicle, and said she sounded like a cello giving up. The guitarist Sterling Morrison called it her Götterdämmerung voice, always just flat enough to sound doomed. And the tensions were super real. She'd hold up an entire show with long candlelit rituals in the dressing room, which drove Reed up the wall. She was partly deaf, which meant she sometimes drifted off-key, and the band rightfully mocked her for it. She wanted to be the lead singer, but most of the songs didn't fit her deep, strange contralto, and by the end of 1967 she had been edged out. Her face got used one more time, first though, as a living projection screen in Warhol's film Chelsea Girls, with little Ari appearing on camera beside her. Her first solo album, Chelsea Girl, should have been a triumph, and instead it became something of a wound. The producer and arranger layered strings and a flute all over it, without ever asking her. Listen to how she talks about it years afterward. She asked for drums, they said no. She asked for more guitars, they said no. She asked for simplicity, and they buried her in flutes. The first time she heard the finished record, she said she cried. And it was all because of the flutes. Even Lou Reed himself admitted the strings and the flute should, by rights, have killed the thing. Everything she did next was a reaction to those flutes. Which brings us to Jim Morrison. In the summer of 1967, out in California, Nico and the Doors frontmen drove into the desert together, ate peyote, and something cracked wide open. She called him her soul brother. He read her Blake and Coleridge and Mary Shelley, and this is the part that matters. He told her to write her own dreams down the way he worked on his poems. Her words, "Jim gave me permission to be a writer." He literally said it to her, she claimed, out loud in the desert. "I give you permission to write your poems and compose your songs." Her very first lyric came straight out of a peyote vision there. A hallucination of deep green dawn light in which the sky became a garden and she felt held inside it. By her own telling, she and Morrison cut their thumbs out there and mixed their blood. "I carry his blood inside me," she said. When he died a few years later, and she went around insisting he wasn't really dead, that is what she meant by it. The story that she dyed her hair red for him, and wore black for the rest of her life after he drowned in a Paris bathtub, is gorgeous. And it is also mostly legend, mostly her. But his death did give her one of the most horrifying songs she ever recorded, "You Forget to Answer." About trying and failing to reach him by phone and only learning the truth too late. She found the instrument that would finally let her become really herself. Around 1968, she got hold of a harmonium, a portable Indian pump organ, reportedly bought off a hippie in San Francisco. She chose it for cold, practical reasons. It was portable, it droned like a church, and best of all, it meant she never again had to depend on a guitarist, because in her own words, guitarists are unreliable people to work with. One factory friend remembered her practicing it for hours on end like a Nazi organist, until the apartment felt like living inside a funeral parlor. With John Cale of the Velvets producing, she made 3 albums that torched every expectation anyone had for a pretty girl with a record contract. The Marble Index in 1968, Desert Shore in 1970, The End in 1974. John Cale built cold, atonal, disconnected sound around her drone. And the results came out so bleak that one of the men who made the Marble Index admitted afterward that they had feared it might drive listeners to unalive themselves. John Cale's own description is the one that sticks. "It's not a record you listen to, it's a hole you fall into." Critics eventually caught up to what she'd done. One wrote that the album anticipated gothic rock by more than a decade. Another simply called Nico the first goth girl who ever lived. Nobody was making this in 1968. She got there completely alone. Super quick pause, because if any of this is landing for you, please do me a tiny favor and hit that like button. It decides whether I keep making these videos, and this one very nearly finished me off. If you want to go further down these particular rabbit holes, I record members-only podcast episodes, where I get into the parts that are too strange for the mains. Becoming a channel member unlocks all of it, including the ability to see videos before they go public, and also exclusive emojis I designed just for us, and cool badges next to your names when you comment on here, and to everyone already inside, sitting with me in the members lounge. Thank you. Sincerely, you are the reason any of this exists. Now brace yourself, because we've reached the stretch of the blueprint I cannot make pretty. Here is the thing nobody who loves Nico gets to skip over. She was, on the record, a racist. In 1971, at a Spanish restaurant attached to the Chelsea Hotel, she attacked a mixed-race singer named Emeretta Marks with a broken wine glass. One witness, Danny Fields, described it like this: "Nico said, 'I hate black people. smashed the glass, and drove it at the woman's face, twisting it until there was blood and screaming everywhere. Another account, from John Cale, has the woman crying out, "How I've suffered," and Nico snarling back that this woman had no idea what suffering was. The exact dialogue differs between the tellings, but the attack itself does not. Emmeretta Marks needed something like 20 stitches in her face, and it was not a one-off. She ended her affair with Lou Reed by informing him she could no longer make love to Jews. Her record label, Island, dropped her after she told an interviewer that she disliked black people and described them in openly dehumanizing, animal terms. Danny Fields, who was Jewish and somehow remained her friend for years, remembered her catching herself mid-slur and telling him, "Oh, but not you. I don't mean you." She flirted with fascist imagery on top of all this, recording that old German anthem, first verse and all, and dedicating it live to a far-left terrorist, which is so internally confused it barely parses as a statement. By some accounts, she once said she found Hitler more appealing than Kennedy, though that remark rests largely on her own reported provocations, so weigh it as that. I am not going to hand you an excuse, because there isn't one. But there is context, and context is not the same thing as absolution. This was a war-damaged woman, buried in heroin, whose relationship to her own German identity was so poisoned that she once said she wanted no familiarity with the German people at all, except for their endurance. This was also the exact era when punks were safety-pinning swastikas to their jackets, just purely to shock. Some who knew her insist she loathed Nazi Germany, and was its wreckage rather than its fan. I'm laying the evidence out on the table. You get to weigh it yourself. That is the honest version of admiring a difficult person. You hold the beauty and the ugliness in the same hand, and you don't drop either one. The last act is squalor, and she chose a great deal of it. For over 15 years, she was a heroin addict, and she spent her final stretch based around Manchester, playing something like 1,200 shows in grim little rooms, half-empty venues, cheap Italian discos. The keyboard player from those years, James Young, wrote it all down in a vivid, unsparing book, with the perfect title, Songs They Never Play on the Radio. For a while, she shared a flat in Brixton with the punk poet John Cooper Clarke. Her last studio album, Camera Obscura, came out in 1985, produced once again by John Cale. She owned almost nothing by then. Her harmonium, and a single bag holding her notebook, her drug kit, some incense, and something to read. That was the entire state of the most beautiful creature that ever lived. And then, a real turn. In 1986, she got herself onto methadone, took up cycling, started eating well, and began clawing back towards something like health, which is what makes the ending land so much harder. On the 18th of July 1988, on the hottest day of the year in Ibiza, she climbed onto a bicycle to ride into town and fell, hitting her head. A taxi driver found her unconscious and fought to get her admitted somewhere, anywhere. The hospitals turned her away, misreading it as heat stroke. She died that evening. Only afterward did the x-rays reveal what had really happened: a severe brain hemorrhage. She was only 49. They buried her ashes in her mother's plot in a Berlin forest cemetery, and her friends played a song from Desert Shore off a little cassette recorder over the grave. So, what was she, really? This is where I want to bring in a Paglia lens. Camille Paglia's femme fatale is the beautiful woman who is dangerous precisely because she is beautiful. And Nico sang femme fatale, inhabited her, frightened people with her. Paglia writes about the Apollonian, the cold sculpted perfect surface, and the chthonic underneath it. Nature as a dark, swallowing abyss. Run Nico's whole arc through that. The blonde ice goddess is the Apollonian mask, the flawless face, the pussy bow blouse, the immaculate ovals of the modeling years, and the harmonium doom, the black robes, the drone, the hole you fall into. That is the chthonic underneath, cracking through the surface and eating it alive. Paglia also writes about the decadent and the vampiric, and late Nico fits that too, a woman slowly draining herself in real time and yet turning the draining into art. She spent her entire second act deliberately breaking the beautiful mask so the abyss could show. That too took her out on a UK tour. Bauhaus and Joy Division built whole careers out of the room she opened. Björk, PJ Harvey, Kim Gordon, and Chelsea Wolfe all point back to her. The serious press that ignored or pitied her while she was breathing now runs headlines about Nico finally coming into focus. The woman they treated as a beautiful footnote to more important men turns out to have been the foundation those men were standing on. Which finally brings us to the mirror, because I promised you something usable, and this is the beauty blueprint here. Let's start with the look everyone means when they say Nico. Phase 1, the 60s ice goddess. Long hair with a heavy fringe sitting low, almost grazing the eyes, sculpted contoured cheekbones, deep-set eyes rimmed in black coal against dead pale skin, a tall, lean, near-boyish frame poured into sharp menswear, white suits, trouser suits, black and white stripes, a pussy bow blouse, a Chelsea boot. It is the Garbo and Dietrich line of severe Germanic androgyny, and it still reads as expensive and untouchable 60 years on. Then phase 2, the anti-glamour, and this is the part I want you to steal. Dark hair instead of blonde, head to toe black, coats even in the heat, heavy boots, the makeup stripped to almost nothing, or reduced to that single smudged dark eye. Here's the thing though, the tip is not wear black and line your eyes. Anyone can cosplay a now dead rock star for a weekend. The real blueprint underneath Nico is this. She treated her own face as material she would edit. She held the most commercially perfect look imaginable, decided it wasn't telling the truth about her, and overrode it. The color, the clothes, the entire register. Until the outside finally matched the inside. That is the move. Not copying her palette. Deciding that your look is yours to author, that you are to reject the version of pretty that other people like, and to build something that is actually true in its place. If a low fringe and a smudge of black coal get you there, wonderful, wear it tomorrow. But the real lesson is permission. The same permission to be a writer that Morrison handed her in the desert. I now hand to you. You get to write your own face. Nico left a few lines worth carrying out the door with you. She said, I rebel against the present. My melodies are from the Middle Ages. A woman with zero interest in fitting neatly into her own era. That's how you become ahead of your own time, ironically. When someone asked her how she would like to be remembered, she answered, perfectly deadpan, by a tombstone. Take the good half of that and leave the sad half behind. She was the most beautiful woman in the room, and she spent her whole life proving she was more than the most beautiful woman in the room, and it cost her everything, and she did it anyway. That is the blueprint, not the face, the inner art. If this one got under your skin, subscribe so my future work finds you. Tell me down in the comments who you want me to take apart next, and go grab that Nico shirt before it's too late. Wear your own face, because no one else can. I've queued up the next chapter for you here. I'll see you soon. Love, Kira. Now go create your own blueprint.
Did you have a good time?